In this lesson, we're going to learn how to work with BSP geometry. Alright, so BSP geometry is very helpful for blocking in levels. BSP geometry can be expensive, and so it's not usually used throughout an entire game. We use it to create the layout, the gameplay, and we can do it very, very quickly. We can get an idea of the scale of our level, how the player is going to play in that level, and it's really great for play testing. And so it's very, very important at the very beginning portions of development of your level. So let's go ahead and build some walls around our table set here. So to do this, I'm going to drag in a box brush, okay, and we need to go to our Place tab, under Geometry, left-click and drag the box. I'm going to drop that right into place here, and you'll notice that it's very, very large. And so what I want to do is I want to go to the Details panel, and I want to adjust the X, Y, and Z values. So I'm going to set this to something like 100 by 100 just to get us started here, and you can see that that is a little too small. So let's set this to 200, and actually let's do 400. That'll give us what we need there, and we'll do 400 on our Y. There we go. And then I'm going to use my move tool, and I'm just going to position that. Now before I do that, let's turn our snapping back on, so that way I can get that right into position over our floor. And we're going to position that back right here, and then I'm going to lift it up to sit right on top of that floor object that we already have. Now you'll notice here that we cannot see any walls on the inside if we go in here. And the reason for that is because this box is additive, meaning that the polygons are only on the outside. Now with a box like this, if it's additive, we could make it hollow. And we can do that by simply left-clicking right here on the hollow and checking that. And what it will do is it will create walls on the inside. Now the wall thickness that we have is derived from the wall thickness parameter here, and we can adjust that. So if I set this to say 30, you'll notice how the ceiling kind of came down, the walls came in a little bit closer. Usually 10 is a pretty good value for wall thickness. Now this is still an additive brush. Okay, and we just have some wall thickness here. Very quick way for creating a very fast room with a floor and everything. But in this case, what I want to do is I want to show you how we can create the same thing without using the hollow, because sometimes this is a very important technique. So let's turn off hollow, and let's create a duplicate of this box. And we can do that by hitting Control and W. Now you could also go up to Edit and Duplicate. Okay. Now notice that it has created a duplicate of that box, and it has kind of offset that. Now the reason for that is because our snapping is turned on, and it's positioning that on a grid point. And it also offsets that so that way you can see that it has been duplicated. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll just position that back over 10 units, and then we'll also do that in the Y, so it's right on top of that box again. Now instead of our X, Y, and Z values being exactly as the box we had before, let's go ahead and reduce that by 20. Now the reason I want to do it by 20 is because I want a wall thickness on each side of 10. So one wall is going to be 10 and the other wall is going to be 10. So let's change the X value to 380 and then the Y value to 380. You'll see that our box is right on the inside of that. And let's go ahead and change the brush type from additive to subtractive. Notice that we have 4 walls, but now we're missing our ceiling. What happened to our ceiling? Well, if we go to our side view, let's left click on that and go to the side. Notice what we have here. We have this blue box, and that is our additive brush. And then we have this red box here in the middle, and that's our subtractive brush. Notice how right here at the top, the additive brush and the subtractive brush are even, and whenever they are touching evenly like that, or even going through one another, it will subtract that out, and so we no longer have a ceiling. So if we want a ceiling, we need to take those vertices along the top and bring those down. So what we can do is we can change this on our Z direction from 200 to 180. hitting enter on that, you'll see that that has created that box, and now we have a ceiling and we have a floor. But let's say that I don't want that floor because I already have a static mesh there for that floor. Let's hit Control Z one time to undo, and that will set our Z value back to 200. Let's say that I just want to bring the top down, but not necessarily do anything with the bottom. So what I could do is go into geometry editing mode. This can be done by going to the geometry editing panel and making sure that you're under the edit function. Simply left click and drag around the top two vertices of that box, and then we can grab our move tool in the Z direction and drag that down. Notice how the bottom has stayed perfectly in line, and now we have a ceiling to that. Let's go ahead and go to our side view, or excuse me, our perspective view, and take a look inside. We now have a ceiling, and the floor has been cut out from that box, and we now see that static mesh of that floor. Perfect. So now that we have that set, we've learned how to create an additive brush, and we've learned how to use a subtractive brush to create something like this little room around our table. Now looking at this, it's not very flattering. Let's say that we want to put a door or something in this. So to create something like a door, we'll simply duplicate this subtractive brush. So we'll hit Control and W to duplicate that. And let's change its size. Let's go ahead and change our value in the X direction to 10. Let's change our Y value to 200. Actually, let's do, we'll do 200. And then on our Z value, we'll do 200 as well. Okay. Let's go ahead and position that to where it's right over that top edge. Now, in order to line this up properly, it might be easier to go to the top view. So let's hit F on the keyboard to focus in on that. And let's simply move this over to where it's right on top of that wall. But notice how it's not going right on top of that wall. And that's because there's no grid points right in the center of that wall. So what we can do is we can change the grid point amount to 5, and that will allow us to position that right along that. Let's also pull this up a little bit to where it's centered right on that line. And then now, if I go into my perspective view, if I come out here, I now have kind of a doorway. Now, to me, that's a little large, and it doesn't really give me a doorway. It cuts off the entire top there. So what we could do is actually drag that down. And as we drag that, notice how it updates after we've dropped that. Alright, so now we've created kind of a doorway for our room. It lets a little bit of light spill in there. And there we go. So now we've learned how to use that BSP geometry, how to create something like a door, and using those effectively. Now there's a little bit more to working with BSP geometry, but we'll talk about how we'll do that once we start getting into our course and laying out our final level. Now what I want to do is I want to take one more lesson, and I want to talk about the content browser, because the content browser, there's a lot in there, and it's a very important part of the interface, and it's going to be very helpful whenever you're organizing and modifying your assets, and we'll get started with that in our next lesson.